Most of the best-known Roman emperors fall into one of two categories. Those who reigned as noble philosopher kings and prioritized the stability of the empire above all else, and those who lived and ruled with such reckless abandon that even centuries later, historians are still trying to separate fact from fiction, because their wanton cruelty or heedless debauchery remains jaw-dropping even today. A handful of emperors opted for the former path, and capable men like Augustus, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius set the standard by which Western monarchs have been judged ever since. But rulers such as Commodus and Caligula show that it's equally possible to become a cultural touchstone through sheer unbridled infamy. However, despite their best efforts, neither Commodus nor Caligula could quite live up to the example set by Nero, a man who has become synonymous with unprecedented debauchery and staggering petulance, a man regarded not only as possibly the worst emperor the Romans ever had, but who even set the archetype for the idea of the antichrist, a concept that has taken on a life of its own in Western culture through the nascent Christian church which Nero tried so hard to suppress. But despite our ideas about him, Nero wasn't so unlikable that he couldn't find love, or lovers. The title of imperator tended to make a person somewhat more attractive than they would otherwise be, and it was most emphatically not an option to say no to an amorous emperor. One of Nero's most distinctive traits was his proclivity for taking almost anyone, friends, spouses, children, even possibly his own family members, to bed. He wasn't especially shy about it, and his legendary carnal appetites are well documented by historians both ancient and modern. Nonetheless, despite his busy extracurricular schedule, Nero, who only lived to the age of 30, still managed to marry 5 times. He married women and men, formally taking the role of husband 4 times in his earlier marriages, and once, allegedly, the role of a wife in his last marriage. Today, we'll look at the poor souls whose lot in life was to love Rome's legendarily debauched 5th emperor. Number 1, Agrippina. First on our list is Agrippina, Nero's mother. And no, Nero did not marry his mom. But we need to start with Nero's mother not because he married her, but because any recounting of his life must begin with a look at how this incredibly intelligent and ambitious woman shaped the person that he became. She was, in many ways, the love of his life. Beginning before he was even born, she groomed him for leadership and maneuvered him into position. After Nero became emperor, she remained a constant power behind the throne until, over time, she became too inconvenient to keep around. But Nero was always Mommy's special little boy. And even after her death, no one ever quite filled Agrippina's shoes. Freud would have a field day with Nero. The man we all know as Nero was born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in 37 AD to mother Julia Agrippina, or Agrippina the Younger, and father Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. Nero was a great-great-grandson of Augustus, as well as a nephew to Rome's 3rd emperor Caligula. Agrippina was Caligula's sister. And he was the grandnephew of Claudius, the 4th Roman emperor. Thus, the boy who would be known as Nero was a proper member of the Julio-Claudian line, the dynasty that had begun with Julius Caesar, and he had from birth a strong claim to the throne based upon his blood alone. His mother would devote her life to pursuing that claim. He was an only child, and his birth was reportedly a difficult one, with the baby born breech. The Roman historian Tacitus reports in an anecdote that upon Nero's birth, Agrippina consulted with a soothsayer.
When she consulted the astrologers about Nero, they replied that he would be emperor and kill his mother. "Let him kill her," she said, "as long as he is emperor."
Agrippina was the daughter of the wildly popular general Germanicus, whom Augustus had once groomed to be a future emperor, before Germanicus' sudden and somewhat suspicious death at the age of 33. She spent much of her early life on campaign in what is now Germany with her family, including her brother Gaius, a future emperor who is better known today as Caligula. At the age of 13, she married Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, her first cousin, a fellow Julio-Claudian, descended from Augustus's sister, Octavia, and, at the time of the ceremony, a much older man. Ahenobarbus, a one-time consul, was notorious for his casual cruelty and was known to have maimed and killed people merely for inconveniencing him. He was said to have pulled out the eye of a man who criticized him in the forum, and to have intentionally trampled with his horse a child who was playing with his doll in a city street. He was banished from Rome by Augustus's successor, Tiberius, who charged Ahenobarbus with moral turpitude, including treason, adultery, and incest with his sister, Domitia Lepida. Ahenobarbus might even have faced execution had Tiberius not died, leading to the ascension of Caligula. Of Ahenobarbus, it may at least be said that he had no illusions about his own character. Suetonius reports that he once remarked, "Any child born to my wife and me is bound to have a detestable nature and become a public danger." While Ahenobarbus was a monster, reviled even in his own time, Agrippina was much more conscious of her public image. She took great pains to conceal her inner nature, and though seen as quite wily now, her peers celebrated her brilliance and beauty. Being the daughter of a wealthy and prominent family, she was given an education that far outstripped those available to other Roman women, even among nobility. She was clever, decisive, and ambitious, but she understood the circumstances into which she had been born. She would have known that there were virtually no paths for Roman women to achieve power or fame for themselves. She would have to pour her ambitions into one who could reach them: her son. In late 39 AD, when Nero, at that time still Lucius Domitius, was 2, Caligula accused his sister Agrippina of being part of a treasonous assassination plot. Further, he accused her of being a serial adulteress. The truth of these allegations is unknown, but Agrippina was found guilty and exiled from the Italian peninsula, leaving her young son to be raised by his brutish father. Within only a year, Nero's father died from illness, and with his mother still in exile, he was taken in at the age of 3 by his paternal aunt, Domitia Lepida, the same sister with whom Nero's father had once been accused of incest. Agrippina disapproved of Lepida. Lepida was far more concerned with her own riotous social life than raising the nephew who'd been foisted upon her. Agrippina viewed her as too permissive a disciplinarian. But from the confines of exile, Agrippina had little other choice. In time, Lepida became very fond of her young nephew, and it's possible that Nero picked up some of his later Epicurean zeal from his time spent with his hard-partying aunt. Regardless, Nero spent a significant portion of his early childhood without either of his parents. After Caligula was assassinated, and his successor, Claudius, reluctantly took the throne, Agrippina was eventually able to return to Rome, where she immediately began preparing her son for a public career. She assigned the boy a male guardian, Asconius Labeo, to instruct him in the ways of Roman manhood, along with a team of Greek freedmen to serve as teachers. With Nero's education taken care of, Agrippina decided it was time to seek a new husband. More than looking for love, she was seeking another avenue through which she could advance her son's, and thus her own, interests. At the time, the Emperor Claudius was married to Valeria Messalina, herself a remarkably strategic political operator who had turned Claudius against everyone but her and her select band of favorites. Though she effectively had Claudius eating out of her hand, her serial infidelity would prove a crucial Achilles heel. Messalina had 2 children with the emperor, a daughter, Claudia Octavia, and a son, Britannicus, who, as the first son of a reigning emperor to survive past infancy, was the obvious heir to the throne. Agrippina began an aggressive campaign to have Claudius formally appoint Nero, rather than Britannicus, as successor. Nero was, she argued, a direct descendant of Augustus. Britannicus was not. Messalina, aware of the threat that the young Nero posed, began publicly denouncing Agrippina and her son. Suetonius reports she even attempted to have the boy killed.
Now that his mother had been recalled from banishment and reinstated, Nero acquired such prominence due to her influence that it later transpired that Messalina, Claudius's wife, viewing him as a rival to Britannicus, had dispatched her agents to strangle him while he was taking a midday nap. An elaboration of this piece of gossip is that the would-be assassins were only deterred by a snake which darted from under his pillow. The sole foundation for this tale was simply a snake's sloughed skin found in his bed near the pillow. Nevertheless, at his mother's prompting, he had the skin encased in a gold bracelet, which he wore for a long time on his right arm.
True or not, Agrippina used this rumor to begin her own campaign against Messalina. Between her alleged attempt to assassinate the young Nero and ever-growing rumors about her infidelities, Messalina's popularity plummeted, and her son Britannicus couldn't help but absorb some of the hostility. During the secular games of 48 AD, Claudius presented the crowd with both of his possible successors, his 10-year-old nephew, Nero, and his 7-year-old son, Britannicus. The crowd, Agrippina noted with satisfaction, cheered louder for Nero. By 48 AD, Messalina's faithlessness to the emperor had become hard to ignore, and that year she was, by some accounts, wedded to another man without Claudius's knowledge or consent. Debate exists on whether she had genuinely married the man, her lover, the senator Gaius Silius, or whether they'd participated in a kind of mock wedding as a ritual ceremony. Either way, Claudius had had enough of his wife's extramarital dalliances, and he had her executed by the Praetorian Guard after she declined to commit suicide. Agrippina, who had remained unmarried since the death of her first husband, saw a juicy opportunity. She began courting the newly single emperor, her uncle. If he married her, she told him, he would have in her son Nero a successor with the blood of Augustus. Plus, a marriage between them would reunite the then distinct Julian and Claudian lines of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Family or not, she evidently made a convincing case. At the same time, Agrippina also grew quite close, sources dispute how close, to Claudius's influential freedman advisor, Pallas, guaranteeing that he would speak to the emperor in her favor. Agrippina had rightfully established a reputation for being iron-willed and superhumanly persistent. Claudius, on the other hand, was known for being indecisive and easy to influence. He probably never stood a chance. Claudius married Agrippina on New Year's Day of 49 AD. By this point, the public had begun to turn on Agrippina somewhat. Many saw her as a schemer who was motivated exclusively by her designs upon the throne. And they weren't fully wrong. Whatever her motivations, Agrippina was now the Empress of Rome, and her son a leading contender for future emperor. Agrippina began to introduce the idea to her husband that, due to the disgraceful conduct of Britannicus's mother, Britannicus was not fit for the throne. He was sullied by association. After all, how sure was Claudius that Britannicus was actually his son anyway? And hadn't Claudius seen how the people preferred her son to Britannicus? Agrippina succeeded. On February 25th, 50 AD, Claudius adopted the 13-year-old Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus as his second official son. The youth would henceforth be known as Tiberius Claudius Nero Drusus Germanicus Caesar. Agrippina had used her eloquence and savvy to elevate her darling son to emperor-to-be. But as the soothsayer had predicted, their story was still far from over. The full monstrousness of Agrippina's baby boy was yet to reveal itself. Tune into our next episode for a continuation of the sordid love life of Nero and his mom.
Hi, Gaius here. Thanks for being part of our efforts to shed light on the more obscure topics related to the fascinating world of the ancient Romans. If you enjoyed Titus's work here, please do us a favor by liking and subscribing. Gratias vobis ago.